be able to prove your impact. I am grateful that this is just another week, actually the 11th week, that we get to dive into just the very material that really just puts you guys in a better position to receive funding. That is the whole purpose of this. Proving your worth, proving your impact, putting yourself in the best position to receive funding from the donors that you are wanting to receive funding from. Last week, we talked about program effectiveness, went pretty in depth actually into that. And that was something that even starting out, I never knew you could go in depth in looking at program effectiveness, but we specifically talked about attendance. That was the example that we used. And you can't just think of attendance in a very general sort of a way. It can actually be very specific, because in looking at attendance, you can look at this diverse range of attributes. So you can look at male or female, you can look at ethnicity, you can look at different things like that when it comes to very much so attendance. And the other factors that were a part of that were understanding and satisfaction. And those were examples that we were specifically using, but those are just things that we briefly touched upon. So last week was program effectiveness. This week, we're going to be talking about community buy-in. And I love community buy-in because it really hits this part that I want to keep referencing over and over again. I will continue to reference it, is the power of stories. And if you guys remember, one of the things that I said is that when you look at the impact of a community, if you look outside at your city or your town or your locality, and you look at the impact, there are three different stories that are being told. There's the story that you tell, the story that the people that you're serving tell, and the stories that the donors tell within that community. And so there are three different stories, at least that I can simplify and minimize, that are being told. And so in that, I think we have to take a step back to realize the power of those stories. And I'm going to take some time to actually reference why I think there's a lot of power in stories. When I think of a story, I think of something that is said that paints a very vivid image into my mind. And so when you think about any type of museum that you go to, you don't necessarily go to a museum to look at words. Thus having an art museum. Now, sometimes there very much so are like different documentations, right? But when you think about that, when you think about those documentations that you looked at in comparison to the pictures that you looked at, which one do you remember more? And which one are you able to speak more on and give more of a synopsis or a summary of what you've seen? I know for me personally, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's just I'm me as an individual, but I'm able to give more of a summary or synopsis of that picture more than just looking at a document of words. And I think there is a lot of power and a lot of truth to a story or a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think that's true because when you look at a picture, there's so many things that pop into your mind, consciously and unconsciously. Even scientifically, there's so many things that pop into your mind. And so what stories do is it gives somebody a picture. It gives somebody a personal picture that they can always hold on to. One of the things that I even do for memorization, and this is just a different memorization technique that I've learned over time, is that when I am reading a book or studying something out, the way I memorize it is I actually think of it as an image. So as I am reading something, I'm thinking of images that I can associate because it's easier to remember those images rather than remembering those specific words. If you think about the memorization techniques you were given in school, the normalization technique was you repeat it over and over again. Repeat the word over and over again until you get it, until it's drained into your brain. Well, the cool thing is when you do it through images, you're not repeating those words all over and over again. What you're doing is you're just remembering that picture. And it's easier to remember that picture ultimately than those words. And so where I'm getting with that is this, that stories, again, put this picture into someone's mind. And so when they put this picture into someone's mind, it makes this story more memorable. And it makes your impact more memorable. It makes your organization more memorable. And it really, really, in a high way, increases your credibility, your confidence, and your comfort. Think three C's: credibility, confidence, and comfort. Credibility, when you look at how credible is your organization and what the work you're doing and the impact of the community. Confidence, how can people really instill confidence in you? Can they trust you? And that goes along with the comfort. Are people really comfortable enough to put their lives or to put their money more so into your organization? And so that's what I'm able to sort of shrink it down to, and looking at confidence, comfort, and credibility when I look at those three C's, because it all goes back to these power of stories. And it looks at stories being very much so memorable, and because it puts this picture into someone's minds. And so that's why I really love community buy-in. I love this topic because it's all about associating a picture with your impact, associating a picture with your organization. So that's what I mean when I say community buy-in. So how do you start that out? I think you can start by asking yourself and maybe the people in your organization, what is one success story from the programming of your organization? What is one success story from the programming of your organization? And that's a really important question to start out, because those are those things, if you think about the very things that you use for presentations and speaking to organizations, and when I say off the cuff, meaning that you have no preparation whatsoever. And so you have to have something in your back pocket. Those are those stories that you want to bring up. And so it really carries a lot of weight when you can be able to pinpoint what is that one success story that I can always revert back to. But not only that, you also want to ask yourself why. So I think a good question is, what is the reason you chose a success story? Because what's going to happen is you're going to explain that success story, and then maybe someone's going to ask you, so why did you choose that? And it really adds a lot of weight when you're able to, again, answer the question of why. And so for the organizations that I'm working for, they have a lot of different success stories, a ton of them, in fact. For the specific recovery team or recovery program that I'm working for, there's just so many success stories because they have so many participants that they are getting employment, they're getting housing, they're getting their own apartment, and not even subsidized housing. They're getting their own apartment off their own money because they've achieved employment. And so they don't have to go back to the very use of opioids that they were going to before, or the very option that they had before, because they have other options. And that becomes huge success stories for that program, because you're reducing the likelihood of someone going back to the very negative sort of uses that they would go to before, but rather than that, you're giving them a different option. That's a huge success story. And the reasoning why, or what is the reason for that? Well, the reason is it goes back to that fishbone diagram for them. The reason is this is our success story because look at the rate of the people that are using opioids. We're reducing this overdose death or overdose rate at this moment. And so that's the reason why for them. And you want to figure out for your organization, what is the reason why for you? I think another thing to do right after that is you want to figure out who. You want to figure out who is your one success story from your programming. And then right after that, going back to why. Why is that person your success story? And why do I say you want to figure out who? Because you want to get to a place where you're not only speaking on your own behalf, but there is so much power when other people are able to speak on your behalf. Going back to those three C's, when other people are able to speak on your behalf, not only just you, but other people, well, you're able to have and help other people to have more confidence, more credibility in your organization, and more comfort. And there is just something huge about when other people are able to advocate for you. I think that's the word to really hit is you want other people to be your advocate. And we can't always be our own advocate, even though that's where it starts out. And it's awesome that we can to some degree, but we have to grow to a place where other people are able to be our advocate. And that's where I start out with that question of who is your one success story? Because whoever is your one success story ultimately you want that person to be an advocate for your organization. You want that person to be speaking on your behalf. But the cool thing is, you want multiple people to be advocates for your organization. You don't just want you to be your own advocate. I think that's the trap that I get out of this, or that's the trap that I fall into, not out of this. That's the trap I fall into where I think that I'm my best advocate when it comes to organization programming. I have to realize that sometimes I'm not the best advocate. I think sometimes I have to realize that, the best advocate is actually the people that I'm serving, because those are the people I'm actually impacting. And those are the people that these stories they're going to be able to really resonate with more than anything. And in Philadelphia, I had to take a step back and realize that I don't relate to everybody that's in Philadelphia right now and the people I'm serving. I don't. I don't have the same stories. I don't have the same background. And so why would I be an advocate for that why would I be the main advocate more so for that program? Because I don't have the background, and that's okay. I can be sympathetic, but I can't be empathetic because I don't have that specific experience, which is okay. But I need to be able to realize that if I'm not the best advocate, I need to make sure I know who is. And so that comes with asking that question of who is one of your one success stories, but also figuring out why. What is the reason that you see that individual as your success story? For Hope for Kids, one of the success or one of the people that are success story, for confidential reasons, I won't reveal the person's name, but she is now in college on a basketball scholarship. And if you know anything about just athletics, you need a certain grade point average to actually get to a Division I university. And a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of underprivileged youth in Philadelphia don't have that grade point average. And watching a Netflix show called Last Chance U in California, a lot of the students don't have that grade point average, so they end up in community college, even though they could have actually went to a Division I university. For her, she was able to go to a Division I university and have an academic scholarship, all because of starting out with our summer programming. And so what she does is she comes back every summer to now intern for the campground or to intern for the organization. And she also desires to be an advocate for Hope for Kids. And so you want to figure out those people. But I want to say this as well, because this can be very tricky to some degree. When you really want someone to be an advocate or speak on your behalf, but they don't want to be the advocate to speak on your behalf. That's something that we don't usually think about. And it comes across as you're just using me. You're using me as a way to get more money, or you're using me as a way to spotlight how amazing your organization is. And it takes away from sometimes the genuineness that you really do have for people. And that is something very tricky to figure out, where you want to hit that middle ground. And I think that middle ground is we have to use questions. We have to asking someone, hey, would you want, even though I see you as someone that is a success story, would you want or would you mind speaking on behalf of an organization and really sharing your experience from everything that this organization was able to afford to you? And a lot of it is really, rather than forcing someone to do that and saying, hey, come here, you can do this, but really taking a step back and asking them first. And that is something that we just don't think about at all, because we get so excited and so energetic about, oh my gosh, like this person would be perfect. I think they can speak on our behalf. They'd be a perfect advocate and everyone will listen to them and we'll get more money. Well, we have to also consider the feelings and emotions and the thought process of the individual that we want to be that advocate. And that is really taking the step to ask them. And so I thought to really take the time to speak on that from personal experience of someone messing up in that regard and not asking and it not going to the way that we were planning, because it came across as disgenuine rather than what our intentions really were. And so we want to just make sure our results align with our intentions. So I think the next question that you can ask is, who are the spokespersons for your organization? Who are the spokespeople for your organization? And that is, you can ask your board, you can ask, really just ask yourself. It doesn't really matter, but you want to figure out who are the spokespeople for your organization. And the reason why you just ask that very broad question, and I will admit it's a very generalized question, it's the intention behind that is because you want to figure out if people identify people outside of your organization. So if I ask that question, who are your spokespeople? And the board just names all the people that are around the table of the board, well, then something is wrong there because we're just advocating for ourselves because we're already personally involved in this. But what about those people that we're actually impacting? Why aren't we thinking about those people as our spokespeople? And so there's nothing wrong with you being a spokesperson because you have to, which is great. And you do know your organization most than really than anyone else. But to create diversity within those spokespeople, you do want someone that you're actually helping to be a spokesperson for your organization to speak on your behalf, the people that you're serving. And even more than that, if you get a spokesperson from donors, because you're helping them to see your progress and helping them to picture everything that you've been telling them through the power of stories. And so that general question actually reveals a lot about our organizations. When we simply ask, who are the spokespeople of our organization? And if you're able to just hear the answers and it's just the people in your organization, well, there's something that may need to change. And maybe you feel like there's nothing that needs to change, but there's no diversity there and you're only speaking on your own behalf. And so the only confidence that someone's going to get is based off of what you say about your organization rather than what other people say and rather than or the people that you're serving and rather than what donors actually say about your organization. And so you want to consider all perspectives rather than just considering specifically one. And so all this ties into community buy-in. Community buy-in is a causal mechanism, if you will. It's something that's in the middle of this entire process that a lot of us don't really think about because we, again, are just so immersed in what we're doing. But we have to take the time to figure out how we can involve the community. And that comes with figuring out who the spokesperson is or spokespeople are. That comes with figuring out who are the success stories, who are the individuals that want to speak on our behalf. And it also looks into figuring out what our success stories are. So if you've got nothing out of this, it really is figuring out what is your success story, who is your success story, and who are your spokespeople. And that all ties into community buy-in. And next week, what we're going to go through is this next step, really. So we talked about program effectiveness. We talked about community buy-in, which is, again, just sort of a causal mechanism in the middle. But now we're going to talk about this idea of qualitative impact effectiveness. So the next section we're going to go through is qualitative impact effectiveness. And we will explain that next time while we come back next week. But for this time, do you guys have any questions?
Here I come. So would you give an example of how you would not approach someone about being a spokesperson? You said you had a bad experience. I'm just trying, I can't figure out, I just can't, imagine how else you could do it other than asking.
Yeah, our bad experience is we didn't ask. We just threw them in there. And the way that went was we had an idea of doing the video for the organization. It was a promotional video. And we were just like, hey, just come here, please, and do this video. And it really wasn't, we didn't give them, you know how you ask a question, but it really is just close-ended and there's no other option to it. That's what happened.
Okay.
And so they felt as if there was no other option. I have to rather than I want to.
Okay.
And so that's what ended up happening there, rather than taking a step back and just being like, hey, would you even want to do this at all? I don't want you to
Gotcha.
feel as if you have to do this. You feel like there's any attachments, and we didn't set that standard or expectation.
I gotcha. Okay. And then when you talk about other people being an advocate for your
Mhm.
organization, is that the same or different than the idea of someone being the face of the organization?
Yeah, no, it can be very similar.
Okay.
And so I would actually even conjoin those two. So those definitely don't
Okay.
need to be mutually exclusive. So
Okay.
they can be around the same. And it's funny. One of the people that I actually work with was talking about, I'm going to be the face of this organization. And it was funny. He's one of the people that are actually being served by the organization.
Mm,
He actually came through the organization, came through being served by the organization, and now he works for it. And so he's a product of really the benefit of that organization. And so, but he defined himself as, I want to be the face of
hmm
this.
hmm
And at the face, even though it is not mutually exclusive, it can be a little bit different. The face
hmm
is like everything runs through you. You're on all the promotional videos, everything that we talked about. It's like you're gonna see your face. A success
Okay.
story could simply just be, no, we just want you to advocate for us when you're around town, or when you're around the city, or when we're going to a specific donor. Can we use your story?
hmm
And so you just want to always have those different stories on hand and those different people. So it can be a little bit different, but at the same time, it is very similar.
Yeah, and I appreciate the expanding even my mind about who could be a spokesperson. You know, that when you said
Yeah.
that it could be the donors or the recipients, I pretty much always, either thought it was the founder or, or
Yeah.
maybe one of the participants, but never really thinking of a donor. And especially repeat donors, it's like they're giving for a reason, you know. So
Yeah. Exactly. No, exactly. And that honestly, that's how we usually think. And it's perfectly the norm
okay.
in every single way. That's
Mhm.
how a lot of us are really just at. I think that is just how our nature sort of just to think that way.
Mhm.
And it just takes time to really just take someone just to say it. It's like, oh my gosh, great. So it really just takes no time at all. It really just takes someone to say it and bring it to light and be like, hey, we can do something, or get somebody more than just us to do this,
Mhm.
and see the power of that. And so, yeah, for us, for the organization I'm helping, it really just took some me just to say it. And then they were like, oh, okay, great. And so some of them already have a system of doing it, and they just don't use it a lot.
Mhm.
And so now they're working on using it more. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Monica. Awesome. Well, what I would do is I will make sure to send this video out, and I will see all of you next week. Awesome. See you later, guys. Bye,
Bye.
Monica.